Hi, I'm Susanna and this is a complete beginner's guide to annotating a novel. That's me, I'm the beginner, and this is how I annotated my first novel. Before last month, I had never annotated a novel. I had annotated non-fiction books, but those were mostly for my studies in the university or writing guides to help me develop as a writer. I had also annotated some non-fiction books just purely for fun, but never a novel. I just never could figure out what I was supposed to annotate and how I was supposed to do it, possibly because we never did it in school, so I didn't have to practice. However, I've seen a lot of beautiful annotated books on Bookstagram and on Booktube, so I was intrigued. This year I made it my goal to annotate a book, so during January and July I annotated my all-time favorite book, Pride and Prejudice. Here's a little recap of what I learned during the experiment and how I would go about annotating a book for the first time. Choose a book you've already read. Like I said, I chose my all-time favorite book for this annotation experiment and I highly recommend that you do the same. Annotating a book you already know and love makes the process a lot easier. I knew that I would love rereading Pride and Prejudice, so if I didn't like the experiment, I knew it would not be the book's fault. I also had an idea of what I wanted to focus on while annotating the book. It's easier to note things like foreshadowing, themes, and character development when you're already familiar with the plot. And finally, even if I didn't like annotating, I knew I would want to continue reading the book so I wouldn't feel like I had wasted time. So the first step is to choose a book that you love and want to take a deeper dive into. Define your goals. Defining your goals helps you to figure out what it is that you want to annotate. What is it that you want to get out of the annotating experience? What are the parts of the book that you want to easily find out later as you flip through the book? Do you want to look at the characters, setting, plot, foreshadowing, or maybe themes, symbolism, literary devices? If you're reading a mystery book or a detective story, you may want to keep track of clues for what has happened and your guesses for what is going to happen. If you're reading a romance, maybe you simply want to draw hearts around all the swoon-worthy things the characters say. For fantasy books, you maybe want to look at things like world building or fantasy languages, or maybe you just simply want to doodle dragons and castles in the margins. Maybe you want to look at how the author deals with heavy themes, or your goal may simply be that you want to note all the sentences that make you laugh or cry or think. Now, my goals for this experiment came from a writer's perspective. First of all, I wanted to see how Austen structures her novel and builds her scenes. I also wanted to know things related to Austen's writing style, how she constructs her sentences, presents her ideas, and uses irony and humor. I also wanted to see how Austen uses the thematical words pride and prejudice in the novel and where people make judgments based on first impressions. First Impressions was the initial title of this book and an important theme in the novel. I also looked a little at things like characterization and foreshadowing. Another reason why I wanted to annotate Pride and Prejudice is that I have a vague idea for a modern retelling of the book. So as I was reading the original, I was also looking for ideas for my own version of this. How I could tweak things to fit the modern setting and some more ideas for things that I could incorporate in my version of the novel. Gather the tools. The next step is to choose your annotation style and gather the tools. In preparation of this experiment, I watched a lot of YouTube videos on how to annotate novels, and I noticed that they focus heavily on what tools to use, what pens to get, and what sticky tabs to use. Now, I didn't want to get a caddy full of supplies to annotate books when I wasn't even sure I was going to like the process, but I guess I have to say a few words of the tools I used. Now, I had three tools: regular pencil for underlining, ruler to make the lines straight, and a mechanical pencil for making notes on the margins. Oh, and an eraser. So much eraser. My handwriting is not the neatest. I used a regular pencil for underlining because the tip is blunter and it wouldn't tear the paper, and I used a mechanical pencil for writing any notes because the tip is narrower and it will make my handwriting at least somewhat more readable. Now, if you don't want to write in your beloved books, one way to annotate is to use sticky tabs or post-it notes and not do any highlighting or underlining or writing in the margins. I've used that method before with a few non-fiction books, but I didn't want to use it now because I think it works better if you don't annotate every single page of the book like I knew I would be doing with Pride and Prejudice. One example of a book where I used sticky tabs is my gorgeous edition of Jane Austen's letters. I obviously did not want to write in the margins of this book. You can even come up with a color coding system for different aspects of the book you want to annotate. I didn't have a color coding system for Jane Austen's letters, I just used whatever I had available. I just marked a few of the letters that I knew I wanted to find easily in the future. But if color-coded sticky tabs is something that you're interested in, there are tons of YouTube videos that explain the system. Another way to track down notes of the books that you read without writing in the book itself is to use a dedicated reading journal. I use mine for any longer notes and thoughts on the books I read. You can make your own bullet journal style reading journal or buy one ready-made. This dragon themed reading journal is one that I've made myself and I have it on sale on Amazon. The link is in the description. Don't worry if it's not pretty. Now, if you choose to go with the pen or pencil method of annotating, your next step most likely is getting over the terror of ruining a pretty book. One way to overcome that fear is to try to find an old paperback version of the book you want to annotate from a thrift store. If the book already looks pre-loved, it's easier to give yourself permission to scribble all over it. For my own annotation experiment, I chose an old Wordsworth Classics paperback that I had on my shelf. It doesn't have the prettiest cover, so I didn't mind if I cracked the spine or if my annotations didn't produce the most Instagram-worthy results. How to annotate? So here's the big question. Now that you have a pre-loved copy of the book you want to annotate and your tools, what exactly are you supposed to do with them? The goal you set in phase 2 should help you answer the question of what you want to annotate, but how do you do that? Here are some ideas. You can underline meaningful sentences, you can circle important words, and you can note your reactions in the margins. I used all three methods for when I was annotating Pride and Prejudice. I underlined important sentences, I wrote marginal comments, and I circled the words bride and proud as they were important thematic words in the book. I noted in the margins how Austen structures her chapters with scenes and summaries. In Pride and Prejudice, scenes with dialogue are followed by a summary of how people react to the information revealed in the scene. As a writer, it was fascinating to see how Austen used this scene and summary device throughout her novel. But not all my notes were from a writer's perspective. I also noted my reactions purely as a reader. I noted sentences that made me laugh or any random thoughts I had while I was reading. Some of my favorite marginal comments were mansplaining, how little you know your own daughter, and says she and continues the talk. But most importantly, annotating is supposed to be fun. So if your chosen method of annotating does not work for you, it's completely okay to switch gear. Maybe you wanted to look at dialogue but realized that description is much more interesting. Or maybe you wanted to underline things and realized that that doesn't work for you and you rather use sticky tabs. Or maybe you realize that annotating just isn't for you, and it's totally okay to just give up. Now for some final thoughts. This experiment taught me a few important things. Annotating made me read the book more thoroughly, at a much slower pace, and to analyze it in a deeper level than I otherwise would have done. There was not a page where I didn't find something interesting to note, whether it was related to the characters, plot, Austen's writing style, or simply a funny sentence I loved. I must say that since I was annotating so much, a bit too much, someone might say, I'm glad I didn't have a color coordinating system. The book would have looked even messier with multicolored highlights than with the pencil underlinings and notes. All in all, I deem the experiment a success. So, will I be continuing with annotations in the future? To be honest, I don't think I will be annotating every book I read, but I will probably try this again with books that merit a reread. So those were my tips for a complete beginner. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in my next video.